Your husband.
Oh, you finally...
And a couple of your kids.
You finally met my husband. Yay.
Alexis pointed him out.
Right. Okay, so what are we doing here today, right? Is we are doing this, I call this a text-based tour of the inner dimensions of the 613 mitzvot. And it's based on two different books. It's based on, number one is called, it's upside down, is called Sefer HaChinuch, right? Which we may go inside in it a little bit, but basically what's the story behind the Sefer HaChinuch is it was written by a rabbi who wrote it for his son, that he could have something to do on a Shabbat afternoon, because Shabbat afternoon could be long and there's not much else to do besides reading and playing games and socializing, and he wanted to give him an opportunity to do something to learn about Judaism. And what's so beautiful about it is basically it goes through every single mitzvah. It goes through in the order that they appear in the Torah. And it says a few different things about it, right? So what does it say is the first thing, and I'm just going to borrow this for a second. The first thing that it says is it says what is the mitzvah, right? It will tell you what the mitzvah is, and the second thing is where does this mitzvah appear in the Torah? It will give you the source of where it appears in the Torah. Now the next one, I wrote why, but it's actually wrong. I need to update this thing. It's not why, okay? Because there's why we do a mitzvah is because God commanded us to do the mitzvah. However, there is kind of like an inner dimension. The word that he used is the shoresh. Shoresh means a root. Like, what's the root of this mitzvah? What's the inner dimension of the mitzvah? Because every mitzvah has two things. It has, just like we as human beings have a body and a soul, right? A mitzvah has a body and a soul. It has the action, and then it has the soul. For example, we're going to do this. We're going to do this in here with the mitzvahs. For example, the mitzvah of honoring your parents. So it has actions. You know, if a parent walks into the room, there's a mitzvah to stand up for them. Now, that's the action, and then the root of the action is it engenders within us an appreciation for our parents, right? And that in itself also engenders within us gratitude for things that we have in life, even though they're not perfect. Okay? Then it talks about how, like what are the mitzvahs, how is this mitzvah achieved, like sort of the action of the mitzvah. And then it talks about today. What is the relevance, like how do we practice this mitzvah today? Because some of those mitzvahs, for example, are no longer valid if there was a mitzvah in the temple, or some of them may be slightly different today. Any questions, comments, thoughts before we jump in? Okay, so let's start with the first mitzvah in the Torah. Okay, so anyone knows what the first mitzvah in the Torah is? Let's guess. Does anyone know what the first mitzvah in the Torah is? Anyone wants to guess?
Recognize God as one.
That's the first of the 10 commandments, but it's not actually the first mitzvah. Okay, the first mitzvah is called Peru or Revu, which means to be fruitful and multiply. Now the other text that we're also going to lean on heavily is called Rav Hirsch. Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch was a rabbi that lived in Germany a few hundred years ago, and he writes prolifically on many different things, and his insights on the Torah are really, really beautiful. So we're also going to lean on his understanding of it as well. So what is the mitzvah? According to Rav Hirsch, he says the mitzvah of Peru refers to marriage. That's one mitzvah. And Revu is to have a family, right? So it's not just the mitzvah of having children, but it's to have to get married and have a family. And he says, Rav Hirsch talks, why would we be tasked to have children? Let me ask you the question. Why would God want us to have children?
To carry on the Jewish faith.
To carry on the Jewish faith, yes. And I'm impressed that you answered that way, because I thought someone was just going to say, because otherwise the world will die out, right? If no one had kids, then there would be no future. But you answered it in the way that Rav Hirsch answers it, and he says that the mitzvah is not just to have a human being, to give birth to human beings, but it's to raise a family to continue the Jewish heritage, which means that it's not just a physical mitzvah, but it's a spiritual, moral, intellectual capability. And he talks about how part of the mitzvah of having a family is to build a relationship with our children such that our children want to learn from us, right? Which is a much harder mitzvah than it is just to physically have a child. Okay, I'm gonna read you out the source. Okay. Vayivarech osam Elokim, and God blessed them. Vayomer lahem, and He said to them, Elokim, God, Peru u'revu u'melu et haaretz, right? And fill the earth. So the mitzvah is to fill the earth, which is, Rav Hirsch talks about, is not just the idea of having lots and lots of kids. The idea is, and we're going to talk about how we fulfill that mitzvah later on, but the idea is that we create a society. So part of, he's saying, if you listen to what Rav Hirsch is saying that this mitzvah is so much bigger than just physically giving birth to a human being. It's the idea of building a just society, a society where we can raise healthy children, where those children want to learn from us and continue the Jewish tradition. Okay, what are the deeper roots of the mitzvah? So on level number one is that God wants the world to be full of human beings, right? That's how God created. He created the world with human beings, and God wants it that way, right? So that's number one. And the second thing is that is God. Why did God create the world? Let's take a step back for a second. Why did God create the world?
For all of us to have our journey.
Yes. Anyone else has anything else to add to that? What is part of our journey?
To grow.
Yep. And how do we grow?
By having experiences.
Yes. Although I'm going to push back a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Experiences on their own can either make us or break us.
To learn from our experiences.
Yeah.
To make choices.
Do we have any indication of how to make those choices and how to learn and
Try.
the Torah, right? Right. God gave us the Torah, which is an intellect, which is a moral compass for us, and it's interesting because we live in a world, a Western society, which is based on so many Torah principles. I was reading on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes about forgiveness. Now, we all take forgiveness for granted, right? That there's such a concept as forgiveness. But he was saying, if you think about it, forgiveness was a world-changing concept. Because before forgiveness, what someone does something wrong, then that's it. There was something called, he was tracing the history, and he was saying there's something called appeasement, right? Where someone could either say I'm angry with you for what you did, but my anger's appeased because I know that you regret it, or I know that you're not going to do it again to me. But this idea of forgiveness is a world-changing concept. And what is forgiveness based on? What enables us to give forgiveness to someone else?
Regret.
When we see that they regret, right? Which is based on the concept of free will. Because if we didn't believe that people could have free will, then we wouldn't believe that they would then be able to feel regret for what they did, because if you did what you did because you had no choice, then you can't regret what you did. And in fact, people who kind of say, I'm really sorry, but I had no choice, are actually telling you, I don't regret what I did because I had no choice. So there is right, and these are concepts that we take for granted in the world. That yes, I can own up and I can apologize, or someone else can apologize to me because they regret what they did. But these are world-changing concepts. And where did the roots of these concepts come from? Forgiveness, free choice. That we as human beings have free choice. They're rooted in the Torah. So much of Western society and the ideas and the morals that we take for granted are rooted in the Torah. Yes.
Is there an element of mercy in that forgiving?
In forgiving, yes, yeah, absolutely, there is. And again, it's also recognizing that we have choice over our actions, and we have choice over we can choose to forgive someone or not, right? But yeah. Okay, so this is a fundamental mitzvah in order to carry on the Torah, right? That we can raise our family we raise the next generation to want to continue the Torah. And by the way, from what Rav Hirsch is saying, that's part of the mitzvah. The mitzvah of educating the next generation is part of the mitzvah of Peru or Revu, of be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, so that there will be a continuation of the Torah. Any questions so far?
I do.
Yes.
Not to go too far back, but okay, I kind of get what a mitzvah is, as a do good. I don't know, but what would be your definition of a mitzvah?
Brilliant question. Thank you. I'm so pleased that you did it. So a mitzvah comes from the word. A mitzvah actually does not have a nice translation. The translation of the word mitzvah is commandment, right? It's kind of been tweaked a little bit to do something good, but that's not actually. Doing a mitzvah is doing something good, but the actual translation of the word mitzvah is a commandment. It's something that God has commanded us. Now, there's also a deeper understanding of that word, is that it comes from the root word, which also means connect. Why? Because there's this idea that when we do a mitzvah, we are connecting to God. Why? Because God created the world imperfect, and he invites us to partner with him. And for example, the mitzvah of having children, right? God's wish is that there are children in the world. When a human being decides to fulfill that wish, they are partnering with God to bring God's will into this world. So that's really what a mitzvah is. It's that connection to God. It's that partnering with God to bring God's will into this world. Same thing with charity. God wants it that we support one another, that we support those who are in need. When a person chooses to give charity, they are choosing to partner with God to bring God's will into action into this world. Which is really an incredible idea, because you're not just being a charitable person now, but you're also being God's emissary. You're partnering with God to give this person what they need. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Follow-up question? Or yes, go for it. No, this is what the point of it is.
Yeah.
Is to learn. And
before I took the class, someone was like, "Oh, you don't want to take that class, then you'll feel guilty for all the mitzvot that you don't do." And so
true.
Yeah. Exactly. That's kind of my.
So.
How do you not feel guilty for, I don't have children. I don't plan to have children. I don't even have a dog, but...
Ignorance is not bliss. Okay? So it's a very good question, and it resonates with me as well. Why would I want to learn? Because then I'm going to feel bad. Because you're not going to fulfill all the mitzvahs. That's the reality. But if you can do something better because of it, that is thing. And I think oftentimes that guilt is an interesting thing, because guilt can be productive if it pushes us to do better. But guilt can also be that voice of what we call taking a step back. as human beings, we have two parts of us. We have a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara. And I apologize for using the Hebrew, but you asked for it, right? Yetzer, what is it? Is that we all have a drive, and we have a drive to do good, right? We have a drive to that's what pushes us to show up to a class like this, even though it's going to be uncomfortable. And we have a drive, that's called the Yetzer Tov, the drive to do good. And then we have what's called the Yetzer Hara, which is the drive to do bad. But I think how it shows, the way I kind of like to describe it is it's that drive in our life that kind of pushes us to be comfortable. Like, I don't want to feel that niggle of guilt, right? I don't want to go to a class. I'd much rather sit on the couch and watch Netflix. Thank you very much, right? Like, it's that drive that wants to just be comfortable. And I think that the drive for ignorance stems from that part to be comfortable, because I don't want to be challenged, because growth is not comfortable. And it is going to be uncomfortable. And I appreciate you bringing that up into the open, because it might be a bit of an uncomfortable process. Yet if it pushes us to do one little thing better, then it's a positive thing. And then we can kind of tell that guilt. The guilt is we have to sort of question the guilt. Is this guilt holding me back and saying, like, no, don't go to that class because then you're going to feel guilty? Or is that guilt kind of saying, you know what, this mitzvah, I'm not holding at that. But you know what, maybe there's something I can do, which is I can choose to learn Torah. Right? And then it's a productive thing. Yes, Sharon.
So, actually, on this exact topic, I think the other thing, like for me, that it does is we learn the surface, like, okay, puru, that's it on the surface. But when you start diving deeper and deeper, and you get other opinions of what does this mean? Could it mean this? Could it mean that? And like in this case, I got a teaching from a rabbi that as Rachel, before she had kids, she was like a mother to so many children. And so what that Ruvu also means in terms of having children is not necessarily having your own, but also taking care of other children in the world.
Yeah, that's also true. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing it up. And I want to say, I'll share something about myself, right? Like, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, oh, tick, I've done that one, right? I've got 8 kids. And we'll
Right.
we'll learn the thing, you fulfill the mitzvah with 1 boy, 1 girl. So, like, but what this mitzvah actually pushes me to say is, hold on a second, you're not done yet, right? Because the obligation is to be part of a society that continues Torah. And that's something that I think we can all do regardless of where we are in our life and whether we do or we don't have
Will you
kids.
say that again? Like the last 3 sentences?
I have no idea what I said.
What is it that we do?
It's an obligation to. So for me personally, it's an obligation. Rav Hirsch says, right? There's a mitzvah to have marriage, right? There's a mitzvah to have a family, and it's not just to give birth and to think and then you're done. Because the mitzvah is to raise the next generation to want to do Torah, which means that we as the adults have to live in a way and behave in a way that makes the next generation look at us and say, hey, we want that. It's a tough call, tough mitzvah. As I said, it's not necessarily going to be a comfortable class. Yes, Patty Jo.
Well, it's my understanding that when that mitzvah applies to women, they're not obligated to have children because of the hardships that could possibly be involved.
Yeah.
But what Cheryl said, it's just passing along the idea of Jewish tradition and creating a Jewish community and a society.
Yeah, which is part of the mitzvah, and we're going to talk about it, how it applies, because you're 100% right. It's the mitzvah is. We'll get to that. The point you raise is a good point. Any other questions? Okay, so how, right? The mitzvah is at from the 18th year. And obviously this doesn't apply to everyone because a lot of people are not mature enough in the 18th year to start. But to start looking for a wife. And then the mitzvah is accomplished by having 1 boy and 1 girl. And obviously we know that there's a lot of that's out of our control, right? So the mitzvah is actually to try to have 1 boy and 1 girl. And once the person has had 1 boy and 1 girl, then according to the halachic parameters, they have fulfilled this mitzvah. Okay, so how does it apply today? It's relevant today, still relevant today, and the mitzvah is actually obligated to men. Now, let me explain something else about the mitzvahs. There's two types of mitzvahs. There's what's called mitzvahs from the Torah, which is that the source is actually in the Torah, and then there's called rabbinical mitzvahs, which is that the rabbis have decided this is a mitzvah. Now, what gives them authority to do that is because one of the mitzvahs is that we have to listen to our rabbis, and there's a whole system put in place of how a rabbi can come and put up a mitzvah. So, for example, nowadays you can't have any rabbi that will stand up and say, this is now a mitzvah, right? Because there's a system, right, of law put into place by which a rabbi can do it, and that system's, firstly, the time has passed. People can't anymore put together rabbinical mitzvahs. And there also has to be, it has to go through the system to be able to pass as a law. For example, one of the laws is that it has to be able to be doable. And there were certain mitzvahs that the rabbis put into place, and then they were no longer valid because people couldn't keep to them. Right? So that's something. So according to the Torah, the mitzvah to have children is a mitzvah for men. According to the rabbis, women are also obligated with this mitzvah. And the reason why that is because men can't accomplish this mitzvah without women. Right? So that's why rabbinically they are also. But the question also is why men and not women? And women generally, much more so than men, obviously not all women. This is a generalization, so it doesn't necessarily apply to all women. But generally, women have more of the drive to have kids than men do. So therefore, men needed the obligation to have children, whereas women don't need it so much. Okay, questions?
So what you're saying with the mitzvahs is we're not creating more mitzvahs, we're just enforcing them, interpreting them. Is that where we are now? But what gives the rabbi the authority to do that? To write
today? Okay, so it's a great question. It's actually a great question. So there's something called smicha, which is called, basically, Moses, if we go all the way back in time, right? We go all the way back in time, God gave the Torah. And he gave the Torah in two parts. He gave the written law, which is the 5 books of Moses, then there's books of prophets, and then there's the writing. So he gave the 5 books of Moses to Moshe at Sinai. And at the same time, he gave him the oral law. Because I don't know if anyone here, has anyone here ever opened up a Chumash and tried to read from it? What's the experience like?
It doesn't explain things.
It doesn't explain things, right? For example, it says, keep Shabbat. What does that mean? Should we all go to the beach on Shabbat? Well, not here, but whatever. All go to the mountains. All go to the mountains on Shabbat. What does it mean to keep Shabbat? Should we just, So the oral law is what was given at the same time to Moses, and explains what it means to keep Shabbat. What does a mezuzah look like, etc. And why was it given in 2 parts? Because it's not supposed to be a book that you open up and you read from. Raise your hand if you would go to a doctor that's done all his training from the library. Never done any in-person training, never been to lectures, never done supervision. Why not? Because some things you can't just learn from a book, right? Yeah. You have to learn from people. You have to learn from seeing other people doing it, from other people watching you do it and correcting you. And Torah is the same way. It's about how to live our lives, and we can't just open up a book and learn from it. It's a system that's put into place that we're supposed to learn from parent to child, teacher to student, etc., throughout the generations. So that's why it was given in two parts. Now, what's happened over time is that, so what happened is Moses was given the original one, and then he passed it on to Joshua. Now, this is kind of like, Samicha process is kind of like going to university and then getting your certificate, right? You have to pass a series of tests that show that you have studied and you're proficient in the subject. So it's the same thing that, and that's, the Samicha is passed on from rabbi to student to rabbi to student, and you have to be a certain, you have to be, just like you have to be a certain level of expertise to be a professor, you have to be a certain level of expertise to give what's called samicha, which is what a rabbi gets before being allowed to give an like pasak. What's the English word for pasak?
A decision.
A decision, a legal decision on something, right? Which means that they've gone through the process of studying. They're now an expert in this thing. They've gone through a testing process, and someone and whoever they've learned from, whoever's passing it, has tested them and seen that they're proficient in and they understand it enough to be able to give legal decisions. Does that explain? Yeah. Okay. And obviously there's different levels, just like you have, your general doctor, and then you have your neurosurgeon, and then you have your expert neurosurgeon. It's the same thing in the rabbinical world too. There's like rabbis who are just kind of proficient on the thing, and then there is rabbis who specialize in a particular area of law, and then there are rabbis who are experts, and people, the whole world sort of come to recognize that these are the people to go to for this particular aspect. It's very similar to any other profession. Okay, so how does it work today? It's still relevant. The mitzvah is from the Torah is on men, and it's women are obligated according to the rabbis, and the reason for that is because women generally have a more of a desire to have children than men do, and it's the punishment for not for not wanting for the. Okay, I want to explain something to you. When we talk about, one of the things that he also talks about is what's the punishment, because sometimes we know what the punishment is, and sometimes we don't, right? So he's saying that it's a very important mitzvah to bear in mind, because when a person taps into this mitzvah for the right reasons, right? And we're talking about here is someone who knows, because most of the time people who do or don't have kids, a lot of the time people who do or don't have kids do it because they want or they don't want, right? We're talking about someone who knows that this is God's will, that God wants there to be a Jewish future, and I am choosing to willfully say not interested in that, right? And in that sort of case, that person is sort of really opting out of what God wants, and that's the problem. So it's quite a severe, it's quite an important mitzvah, is what he's saying. Does that explain it? Yes? Any questions before we move on to the second one? Second one's a super fun one.
So what if it's a choice and you can't have children for whatever reason?
So then the person's fulfilled it by
Trying.
There are many mitzvahs that a person can't fulfill because through lack of choice, right? Let's say someone doesn't have money and they can't give charity, right? Someone's parents died very young, they can't fulfill the mitzvah of honoring your parents. Then it's out of your control. There's a Hebrew word for it, again, which is called ones, which means that you're unable to, right? It's out of your control, you're unable to, and a person's not held liable for that. Okay, I'm going to pass out the next two. We're not going to get through the next two. We'll get through one, and then we'll do the next one in 2 weeks' time when we continue.
Is next week a holiday?
Yes.
Oh, good. I mean, because I have other things. I was just
Yeah.
going to say I can't be here next week.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So next, it's Sukkot, which starts on Wednesday night until you're going to join us in the Sukkah on the.
Wednesday.
Yeah. Great. Perfect.
And then I'm out of town.
Friday morning on that Tuesday.
Right.
So
Okay.
there's no class next Monday?
No, next Monday is no class.
Okay.
Okay. Where do I have? Okay. The next mitzvah comes in the third Torah portion, which is fascinating because in the first book, there's 5 books of the Torah. The first book is Bereshit, and there's only 3 mitzvahs that are given in the whole of the Sefer of Bereshit, the whole of the book of Bereshit. What is the next mitzvah? The next mitzvah is Brit Milah. Okay, what is Brit Milah? Is that to have if someone has a baby boy, then they have. Did I give you out the notes that come with it?
Yeah.
Do I have one for myself? Let me see. Okay, so we're gonna read the source of it.
Did you plan your notes?
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
yes, I've got my notes. Okay, there we go. Does someone want to read the Hebrew? Okay, I mean you could, or shall I read the Hebrew for you? Okay. Vayomer came at Avraham. God spoke to Avraham and said to him, Va'ata, and as for you, et briti tishmar, my covenant you shall keep, ata you, v'zarecha, and your children, acharecha, after you, l'derasam, throughout the generations. Zot briti asher tishmaru. This is my covenant, which you shall keep, beini or beinechem, between me and you, or bein zarecha and acharecha, and your descendants after you. Himal lachem kol zachar, every male among you shall be circumcised. Unamaltem espasar arlaschem, you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. V'haya laot, and that should be the sign. Brit beini or beinechem, of the covenant between me and you. Okay, how does this mitzvah work? Oven shmonat yamim, when at the age of 8 days, yimal lachem, every male among you shall be circumcised. Kol zachar l'daresechem, every male throughout your generations. Yelid bayit, that he that is born in the household, or miknas kesef, or purchased with money, mikol ben nechar, from any stranger, asher lo mizarecha, who is not of your offspring. Himal Yumal Yelid, he that is born in your household, or miknat kascha, or purchased with your money, shall be circumcised. V'haisa briti bivsarchem levrit osam. That's my covenant should be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. V'arel zachar, an uncircumcised male, asher lo yimal, who was not circumcised. Et basar arlasai, the flesh of his foreskin, v'nichrasai hanefesh, that soul should be cut off, hahi me'ameha, from its people, et briti hamehefar, he has invalidated my covenant. So firstly, anything that sprung out at you from what we just kind of read?
I don't really understand why we do that.
That's why we're here.
Okay.
And I never understood it either until I things, yeah.
Does it differentiate a male person from everybody else? So it shows that you are Jewish because you're circumcised. It makes you different. It makes you unique, or your own entity, and you do that to show that you are not like everybody else.
But no one's going to see it unless you're family.
You don't know.
Well, I mean, generally speaking.
Yeah.
The most important person will see it, which is yourself.
That's deep.
Yes, it is deep. Anything else that can? I want to raise up that question, and Betsy's given us a little bit of a window into it. Anything else that came up from what we were reading?
Doesn't have to be just someone you bore.
Yep, it has to be, and it's talking about a slave, right? Like when you're saying talking about someone that you purchase for money. If you buy a non-Jewish servant, they would also have to be circumcised.
Does that initially make them Jewish to circumcise,
No.
or do they need to go to the mikvah?
They would still need to go through the process of conversion. It wouldn't make them. And it's that is not really practiced nowadays, because it was more when we lived in Israel and we were, we governed ourselves, and people that nowadays Israel is a multicultural country, right? But then we're talking about in a time when Israel was a Jewish place, and anyone else that came in was either they came in as a slave or a worker or something like that. And so if they were a servant for someone, then they would have to be circumcised, but they wouldn't be halachically Jewish.
Do you think the word circumcision comes from this? Like, did they just not just make it up, but they kind of just made it up?
Circumcision.
Like, was there anything? There was like, who just like? Okay, God decided that that's what's going to happen, right? So you have to give it a name. It's called circumcision
Could be.
or bring on, or whatever you want to call it.
It could be. I
Did
mean,
anyone ever do this before the Jews? In other words, kind of.
so I don't know historically. I mean, I know the Arabs do circumcision as well, but that's also rooted in the Torah, because Ishmael was 13 years old.
You don't have to know
I would
the
find.
answer.
I don't know. I would find it. I would find it hard. I would be hard pressed to think that. I don't know. Maybe I have no idea if they did or they didn't. Okay, so what's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is that if you have a child or a servant to cut and reveal the foreskin. Okay. Now, why is it? Why would God have given this mitzvah? So there's an interesting story that is told by the anti-circ movement has been going for a long time. And the Talmud tells a story of Rabbi Akiva. And a Roman came to him who was anti-circumcision. And he thought, you know what, I'm going to show Rabbi Akiva that circumcision is wrong. So he went to Rabbi Akiva and he said to Rabbi Akiva, what's better? Something that God makes or something that human makes? So how would you answer that?
What's better? Probably something that a human makes.
Okay, interesting.
God can make anything.
So why would something that human makes be better? And I'm just
Because
pushing
humans
back.
can't make everything.
Okay. So Rabbi Akiva tells him, come back tomorrow. So he comes back tomorrow and he walks in and the house smells of this like delicious fresh bread, like fresh bread just coming out of the oven. And he has on his table, he says he has a loaf of bread and he has some wheat. And he says to him, which one would you like? And obviously he chooses the bread. And he says to him, see, what human makes is better than what God makes. Because what did the Roman kind of say, is the Roman was thinking to himself, Rabbi Akiva's obviously going to say what God makes is better because God can do anything, right? So obviously what God does is better. And then he's going to tell him, well, God creates this perfect human being. Why are you mutilating him? But what Rabbi Akiva is teaching him is he's saying, God created an imperfect world. And he created us inside that, in that imperfect world, and invited us to partner with him to make the world better. Right? That's why you have wheat. Who's eating wheat? Plain, picking wheat off the thing and eating it. No, we take it, we grind it, we bake it into bread, and that is so much better than plain wheat. And he's saying the same thing, is that what's the roots of this mitzvah? And once we understand it, we'll understand why it applies to boys and not to girls. What's the root of this mitzvah is that God wants us to have a reminder of that, right? God wants us to have a reminder that you are born into an imperfect world, and your job in this world is to fix that world, to make it a little bit better. And that's why God says, I want the males in the Jewish people to have a physical reminder that we're here to improve upon the world. It's our job with our body and our soul to make the world a better person. Why a male and a better place? Why a male and not a female? So interestingly enough, this isn't one of the mitzvahs that women usually like complain about not having about. Right? But in Jewish thought, there's okay, again, this is a big concept, so we'll see how much we get through. But in Jewish thought, there's a male energy and there's a female energy, and it's a continuum, right? So it doesn't mean that every male is like this and every female is like that. And as a result of male and female energies being different, men and women are tasked with different roles in the world. And in very briefly, the man's job in the world is to remember. Right? It's the same. The word for male in Hebrew is zachar, which is the same as zachar, which means to remember. Right? Their job is to keep the memory of Judaism alive. Right? That's why their job is to study Torah for the sake of studying Torah. Women have a mitzvah to study Torah, but only it's not for the sake of studying Torah. It's for the sake of living a Jewish life. That's the female role is very briefly is to take that memory and activate it and bring it to life, right? It's and we see this in the physical world. The male, what does the male contribute to a human being? A little bit of DNA. That's it. What does the woman contribute? The woman, takes that little bit of DNA, the sperm, and nurtures it for 9 months, and then a human being comes from it, right? So the male and the female energies are different energy, and the male energy is to keep that memory alive, and that's why he specifically is tasked with having a physical reminder on his body that this is what you're here for, right? That you are different. You are different than everyone else. You have a special role to play in this world.
Do boys know that that's why that's done? I mean, obviously not when they're that age, but as they grow older?
They should. Do they? I don't know. I mean, it's. I'm just going to say it is sad that a boy would go through that and live his whole life without knowing it. Is it true that a lot of people have no idea what the roots behind Brit Milah are? Mm-hmm. Yes, it is true, but it's not how it should be. Yes, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just have a question.
Sure.
There are some Jewish boys who just have a circumcision, like in the hospital or something, as opposed to a ceremony, a Brit Milah ceremony. So is that different, or in terms of what it means, or I'm not sure.
Yes, so it's a good question, and yes, it could be different, right? Because it has to be done by someone who is a moihel, right? Mm-hmm. Which is someone who knows how to perform it according to Jewish law. So someone who does a medical circumcision doesn't necessarily fulfill the mitzvah, although it could be done at the same time, right? It could be done things. So it's hard to tell, but it's a good point to bring up. It should be done by someone who knows how to fulfill it according to Jewish law. Okay, why particularly the reproductive area? Stumped you.
Is it because that's where life is created?
That's where life is created. That's where passion lies. And you know what so much of Judaism, and I think, in fact, probably all of Judaism is? It's about learning to control our passions, right? Not ignoring our passions, not forgetting our passions, but learning to become the master of our passions, right? So it's we don't ignore it, but what we do is kind of say, look, you've arrived in this world, and your task in this world, because you are Jewish and you have a different mission than everyone else, is to become a master over your body. And by that we mean someone who's able to do the right thing even when they don't want to, right? We're not talking about someone who's an Olympian, right? It could be a part of a self-mastery, but we're really talking about someone who's becomes a master over their bodily passions. Okay, some of the details of this law is that it's every Jewish male, every slave born into a Jewish home. We even if a baby boy is born on Shabbat or a Chag, then and the 8th day is on the Shabbat or Chag, they would do it on the Shabbat or Chag, even though generally you're not allowed to make someone bleed on Shabbat, but we push off Shabbat to do it at the right thing. The responsibility lies on, obviously you can't obligate an 8-day-old baby to give himself a Brit Milah. The responsibility lies on the father, so it's the father's responsibility to ensure that the child gets it until the child is bar mitzvah. Once the child is bar mitzvah, then it becomes his own obligation if he hasn't done it yet. Okay, and if there is no father, then it's on the Beit Din, right? So they're and these are technical terms because it basically means like whose obligation is it? The father has to pay for it, for example, right? If there is no father, then the Jewish community has to pay for it, right? It's not actually the mother's responsibility. And this is the only positive commandment where the Torah talks in such strong terms about someone who fails to do it. That the soul gets cut off from the Jewish people.
Whose soul? The babies or the fathers?
That is a good question. So, I guess if the child is over 13, then it would be, and they failed to do it, then it would be them. But otherwise, it would be the father. Yeah. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any comments on this? Okay, so we've gone through the first 2 mitzvot. We're going to leave the third one for next session, which is going to be in 2 weeks' time. If you have any feedback or anything you'd like to share, you can share it in either here or you can get in touch with me afterwards.